everyone. Emily, nice to meet you.
Here.
Do I need this?
Yeah.
Okay. I am here on behalf of UNO's Coastal Education and Research Facility to share on a planting we received a grant from the Louisiana Native Plant Society for this year. This is a salt marsh pink that is not in our garden, but I saw on the Chandler Islands this summer, and it was really too pretty not to share with you all. So we'll get started. So who am I? I've recently graduated from the University of New Orleans with a degree in Earth and Environmental Science with a coastal concentration, largely in part because I am from somewhere that used to have a very rich estuary. And in my lifetime, I've watched that change, and I've watched them really struggle to correct some of the errors they've made in their tinkerings on the coast. And we have something really beautiful here that's worth protecting. So I want to be a part of that. I was introduced to concepts of native plantings through a project called Project Seed with Dr. Christopher Belser at UNO. Previous to that, in many ways, I was a very selfish gardener. I never really took the opportunity to think about the other things that might need or be benefited from our plants outside of humans. When I first started that garden, I wanted to make a food and a medicine garden, but through this process, I was introduced to the holistic benefits and practical reasons that we may want to plant native, and it just really has shifted my perspective and felt like having my eyes open to ecology for the first time. So I'm sure many people here have had the experience where it's like once you turn that light on, you see things that you never saw before, and you see it in a much different way. So that's what that experience did for me, and I really enjoyed it. So when I started working at the Coastal Education and Research Facility, I asked Dinah, the director, like, why don't we apply for a grant to reinvigorate some of our plantings that we've had on the campus? So that is Dinah in the photo. She could not be here tonight, but I think it's, yes. Yes, I think it's very important to mention that this, there's no way that I could have done this without Dinah and her guidance and her like patient teaching and allowing, like guiding me without kind of telling me what to do and letting me figure it out on my own. So I actually learned something, right? Because that's the purpose. So that's where how we got here. She's been working in New Orleans as a coastal scientist and educator for a really long time. So I'm not the only person that she has impassioned with this. So quite a few of us. And I hope that at some point, if you find yourself in the New Orleans area, you'll all take a chance to come visit us out at CERF. For over 2 decades, UNO's Pontchartrain Institute for Environmental Sciences Coastal Education Program has introduced thousands of students to coastal environmental field experience. We have classroom and lab space. There's kitchens, bathrooms, dorm space inside, a large outdoor area with water access. Students and visitors can explore the marsh via canoe, collect samples, investigate wetland systems, and a large part of the reason that we exist is our mission is to increase awareness and understanding around the issues that surround coastal Louisiana by interpreting the science and providing opportunities for students to interact with the environment. So since native plants are a pinnacle part of a healthy ecosystem, it was only natural that we wanted to create some native gardens on the property. And then I feel like lately I feel like I may have worked really hard to convince you all that we needed to protect these because some of the like more recent things that have been happening in our world really make me feel like I need to defend this point. But why are they important? So you can be armored with the tools to inform other people about this. We have this incredibly rich, rare ecosystem here. There's nothing like our estuary in the world. It fuels our economy. It's of great cultural value to us. It's a first line of defense, not just for our coastal communities, but for the ocean from us. It offers us a buffer system from storms, but it offers the ocean protection from our land-driven contaminants. We do know that there's going to be some increase in sea level rise in the future, and that hurricane activity is supposed to increase. There's some uncertainty as of exactly how that's going to happen, but we know that it's going to happen, and it doesn't have to be entirely doom and gloom, and hopefully you get some of that from this presentation. But as a result of that, our coastal habitats are beginning to move inland over time, and they are at risk due to coastal squeeze. So one of my questions here is, where are we going to make the room? If you're not familiar with it, coastal squeeze refers to just the fact that our coasts are such incredible, rich areas that we have backed up so much community and infrastructure to them. So in many instances, for like example, seagrass or marsh communities that offer us a lot of ecosystem benefits, where are we going to put them? Where are they going to go? So just a graphic to show you what this process looks like as they move in. Most of us in South Louisiana are somewhat familiar with this already. But so we know that the salinity gradients are changing. They're moving landward, and why should you care? Well, I think that allowing the estuary space to move in is going to be pivotal to managing the rate of change and conversion of many of these habitats, and that we can do that in a meaningful and conscious way if we're assisting nature with it, in a way that helps reduce the loss of biodiversity, reduces the amount of pioneering invasives that crowd out the native ecology. And aside from this, the coastal halophyte plants are just really cool, and they have applications outside of this area as well. I know in the Northeast, they have issues with saltwater intrusion into their water wells, and there's some bioremediation practices of using things like salt marshmallow to help pull the salts from the soil before it makes it there. So they're pretty cool plants. Oh, in addition to that, the USDA and the federal government also has acknowledged that this is happening. So recently, I can't speak for the past few weeks, but recently they were offering conservation easements for people with property on the coastline that might be experiencing conversion to wetland or saltwater intrusion. So if you know anyone that could benefit from that information, I hope you do share it with them. All right, and this is one of my favorite quotes from Ada Leopold. That was introduced to me in my undergrad. So if the land mechanism as a whole is good, then every part is good, whether we understand it or not. If the biota in the course of aeons has built something we like but we do not understand, then who but a fool would discard the seemingly useless parts? To keep every cog in the wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. And for much of US history, our wetlands have been treated as a liability and something that we need to move out of our way. In our coastal tinkerings, we have drained freshwater aquifers and created mazes of canals on the coast throughout the 20th century that have made us more susceptible to saltwater intrusions than we otherwise would have been. In addition, we do have many restoration projects that are taking place on the coast, but many of them focus on grassy species to slow down erosional rates. But if you walk through the marsh, it's easy to see that there's lots of other species that are hidden in plain sight there, like bull tongue and marsh morning glory and loose strife and marsh camphorweed. And in addition to that, the first, precaution of intelligent tinkering is not to throw things away before we understand them. And we've done a good bit of that on our coast. But the more that we learn, the more we know that we don't understand. We're just beginning to quantify things like the role that our wetlands play in the carbon cycle and carbon sequestration. I could have a whole separate presentation for that, but if you're interested in learning more about it, the Water Institute of the Gulf has some great resources on their website, and I highly recommend that y'all check it out. And aside from that, I think that we can all agree that ecosystems carry an innate value that we can't quantify, that they are priceless to us. I mean, I trust that nature put it here for a reason. So I hope y'all can see that. This is just to give you a little direction to where exactly we are in the estuary. So the University of New Orleans main campus is your little yellow guy, and then we're all the way over here in New Orleans East at the red dot. Lake Pontchartrain is above us, large saltwater bay beneath us, Chandeleur Sound, and then the open Gulf of Mexico. So we are in the intermediate marsh, technically classified as the deltaic marshes of the Mississippi River alluvial plain. It's characterized by a lot of species, some from freshwater and some from brackish water. Oh, thank you. Salinity typically averages around 3.3 parts per thousand there. It's a really productive marsh. Lots of larval marine organisms grow up there before they head to the open ocean. But it is oftentimes, it's sensitive to shifts in salinity, and the overall acreage of the intermediate marsh is decreasing in part due to saltwater intrusion. In the summer of 2023, I got to witness some of this firsthand when we had an extremely bad drought in South Louisiana. And canoeing through the marsh, you could see that the Spartina alterniflora, which typically is much farther out in the polyhaline marshes, was starting to colonize all along our intermediate marsh. So we're seeing these things start to happen, and it's going to be okay. It's just a very an area that is very dynamic, and we're going to experience some change. So how are we going to handle it? So some more context for how the salinity changes so quickly here has to do with the canal systems that you can see in the image. So we've got Lake Bourne here, huge saltwater bay, the Intracoastal Waterway, which has been there since about 1930. This is a natural pass, Chef Menteur, named after a Choctaw chief, Big Liar, after he was dismissed from their tribe. Who else is important over here? Oh, this is relative. This little guy right here is the Marquez Canal, and I'm about to tell y'all about that shortly. So hydrologically connected to the Gulf of Mexico for all intents and purposes. A little history of the background. So before the modern New Orleans East, this was Choctaw land. It's evidenced by the many Indian mounds that are around the area. There is a little dark past there as well. There's some military forts on either side of where our facility is located. Some were used to house the Choctaw before they were moved to reservations up north when we began to colonize this part of the coast. But the oldest fishing and hunting club in the entire United States is there. So part of what gave Louisiana its title as Sportsman Paradise. It's been there since 1815, and Andrew Jackson was one of the regular patrons there and would visit from New Orleans. So just a little history. Now, the Marquez family, I had the pleasure of speaking to Raul IV in preparation for this presentation because his family's been there for many generations since about 1900. The Marquez Canal that you see right there, his grandfather began digging out with his bare hands around in the early 1900s. So before the railroad was around, there really wasn't a whole lot here other than fishers or trappers. But what you're seeing here is in the exact same place that our garden is currently at. This is the Marquez Grocery and Restaurant. It was, as it says, a famous landmark and truly a mecca in New Orleans East. It was the place to be on a Friday and Saturday night. Before the highway was there, his great-great-grandfather built a ferry to bring folks back and forth from the west side of Chef Pass to the island. So in this portion of the photo, you can't see, but there's a fueling and docking station, just some things that we think about as good ecologists, right? We want to think about the land use history. And where all of these vehicles are, there's a shell road that still exists somewhat to this day, and it still plays a role in influencing the plant communities there because we have seen some seaside oxide daisies that are often found out on the barrier islands there as well in the calcium-rich soil. Let's see. Okay, so this is CERF when UNO first acquired it in the 90s. And you can see really low elevation, almost intersecting with the water table, and just like 2, maybe 3 trees on the property. So on this next slide, I'm going to play a really short video just because when we went to go clear out the space to build the rain garden that we put at CERF, I was kind of just overwhelmed with the beauty of the bird song that I could hear, because this is something that Dinah and previous students at UNO created, that these species are happy and establishing in our microhabitat because of the work that they did. Is it gonna play? I hope y'all can hear it. Pardon the wind. Yeah, so one of the questions that I had when we went to install this new garden was, how can you renature or restore land that's created by humans? Because I think it's easy to tell in the photos that we were looking at that this property is built entirely on built land that was created from canals being dug out. And the real answer is I can't ever turn it back into marshland. But what we can do is mimic natural ridges that are running throughout this entire area. So these are, this is our list of species that had been added by previous students. And then beneath is our list of things that have been growing very happily there on their own. So it felt a little hard to be a purist at first, but then I just realized that I didn't have to. We do what we can. Excuse me. So why do we apply for the grant? We wanted to add more resources to the campus and educate visitors about the healthy ecology. Many of our the plants that we had put in from previous plantings were damaged by Hurricane Ida. And then another attempt were damaged by facility services, which at UNO has been a bane of our existence at times, that they don't mean to do it, but they just like mow right over some of our plants. So you'll see this garden is very well protected. It's like got its own little Fort Knox going on. So we have to be really careful in choosing plants because it is volatile out there at times. It's very beautiful, but storm surges are very intense. Even when the hurricanes are far away from us, we still see quite a good bit of storm surge. I needed to check the salinity range before we could put anything in the ground because not all of the plants that I'm familiar with will survive or thrive happily there. So I did not take soil samples in lieu of that. I used a resource that we have I believe through the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority and USGS. We have this coast-wide reference and monitoring system where you can get all kinds of data about what's going on the coast at any moment at your fingertips. If you know how to access it. These are all of the different points that they have that you can get information about. So we gathered information from 4 of them. This guy here, this is probably a bit saltier than where we are because it's close to the Wrigley's and farther out towards the Gulf of Mexico. But I did include it as well as the 3. This one's probably closest to CERF. This one's definitely fresher. This one doesn't qualify because as you can see this line right here, that's the New Orleans levee system. So it's not hydrologically connected. And these are our salinity ranges from our soil pore salinity meters. So in 2023 or 22 to 23, I'm not even going to pay attention to that bottom one because it's so salty, but it's a more normal range for us to experience. You can see in the fall of 23, yes, in the fall of 23, we had our drought and we had incredibly high salinity ranges, and that is definitely high enough to start converting plant communities. And just a note, so the reason that I couldn't just use the salinity for the water in the pass is because there's oftentimes the salinity of the soil in the marsh can be much, much higher depending on weather patterns and then density gradients of salt water that sometimes the deeper that you go, it can actually get saltier. So that can be an issue with your long root systems if they're not friendly with it. So now we're getting to planting day. I'm going to take you chronologically through this experience and share with you challenges and lessons that I've learned along the way. But we had our first installation in the garden on April 27th So we planted some lizard's tail, some swamp spider lily, lots of salt marshmallows, some rosy camphor weed, because it seemed like a good substitute for our marsh camphor weed, seaside goldenrod, and rattlesnake master. And these are the UNO students that helped us. We had a blast. We had time to go canoeing out in the marsh, and we even got to take our good friend Chi-Chi, the Chihuahua, with us, which was like a highlight for all of us. The bridge was broken that you saw at UNO. And that was a challenge for the first month or so there, that we were either going to take a little over an hour trip every time we wanted to get there to tend to a new garden, or we were gonna like carry everything across, which was fine. These are the things that we do for love. So that's a better picture of the beginning. Salt marshmallows are up on the edge. There's some crinum on the edge. I put the camphor weed up a little farther on the edge, and yeah, that was its first day. Okay, late May, everything is taking off. As you see over here, I am very geared up. I underestimated the power of salt marsh mosquitoes. They are relentless. So I wish I could see that better, but I have probably like 50 mosquito bites on one hand, and that was through gloves. So I learned the hard way that salt marsh mosquitoes, they lay their eggs in dry soil, and it requires periodic inundation for the cysts to hatch. So every time I was watering the new garden, I was helping a population bloom in the beginning. Again, these tinkerings that Otto Leopold was talking about. Also fighting invasive nutsedge, lantana, sticker bushes, and a native species of pepper vine, which just will take over everything. It's all over this property. Okay, cool. All right, early June, everything's really starting to take off. This is my partner, Dan, who out of love has been roped into helping me clear out and clean and weed the garden at times. Happy Valentine's Day. So everything's looking good so far. We added some Texas verbena and some muck sunflowers. The verbena was donated to us by Chickadee natives, and then Ron Brody of the Living School allowed us to rescue some swamp sunflowers from that school's property before it was recently closed in New Orleans. So we gave them hopefully a happy home at CERF. Okay, our first adventure of the summer. That's not true. The bridge was the first adventure, but this is our second semester. So the garden itself looks great. We have some rattlesnake master blooming. We have some rosy camphor weed that's going to start giving us seed soon. The mallows are taking off, but Hurricane Beryl landed in Texas, and the storm surges were intense enough at CERF that it threw one of our research vessels up on the dock and knocked out our water system for the rest of the summer. We're actually still kind of messing with that a little bit. So if the garden was going to be watered after that, it was going to be through 10 1.5 gallon jugs that I brought from my house in the 9th Ward. But it's okay. Again, the things that we do for love. Everything looks good in part, I think, because we had a lot of rain up to this point. I was a little worried about the lizard tail and was going to kind of just use it as an indicator species because it does not typically like salinity. But it looks great so far, I think, because of all the fresh water that was coming in. I can't water it from the past for the obvious reasons that it's going to increase the soil salinity too much, and then no one's going to like it there. Early August, I think that I maybe should have planted these salt marshmallows a little farther apart than I did because they're starting to crowd everything out. I knew they would get big, but I had no idea they were going to be this happy there. But everything looks great. Even my, it's hard to tell in this image, but this is like the Texas verbena just really starting to shoot up and starting to get snacked on by some of our pollinators, right? So that made me happy to see that they were making good use of it. I did attempt to thin out these salt marshmallows to make a little room for other stuff to get some sunlight. I actually used them to make a tincture, an infusion with coconut oil because mallows have been used for a long time for their emollient properties. So why let it go to waste? Late August, it got really hot and the dramatic mallows started to drop leaves, but I was really trying not to, after the garden got established, I didn't want to mess with it too much because I'm not going to be a UNO student forever, right? This garden is going to have to spread its wings or its leaves and grow all on its own. So we did encounter these issues, right? We have some mealybugs that are really taking off here, which me 3 years ago would have immediately went to this with insecticide, but I didn't. Because that defeats the purpose of what we're doing here now. And they ended up going away. So nature took care of it. I'm not sure how, but probably did a better job than I could. I also thought I was being sabotaged this month. I thought maybe someone came and tried to cut half of my garden down. But again, back to the Ada Leopold quote and the tinkerings, I tried to pull a ton of that pepper vine out on the facility because we were having visitors and I wanted it to look nice. But the swamp rabbits that eat there must have been enjoying the berries and the leaves because they went straight for the garden instead, which again is fine. That's who it's there for, right? We're here to feed the wildlife and to enrich the ecosystem. So it hurt a moment when I had to think about what I was here for in the first place, and then it was fine. The salt marsh mallow is doing great. The lizard's tail, I don't know. I didn't think it was going to make it. And I think I planted the camphor weed too high because this is what the Pluchea odorata looks like in the marsh while mine is getting crispy in the rain garden. Early September, I started to really see the pollinators enjoying it. We've got a long-tailed skipper hiding out over there and a bumblebee. I think it was around this point that I chopped some camphor weed down and shook my seeds everywhere and hoped for the best. Okay, so it wasn't a big hurricane for us, but it was definitely enough to create a large storm surge at CERF. So on September 11th, Hurricane Francine hit land. Across open water, it had 100-mile-per-hour max winds, so that is definitely enough to generate a big storm surge for us. And this is what it looked like the day afterwards. Things are a bit beat up, but the rain garden is rain gardening and doing its job and keeping water from running off and into the pass. And then the next day, it was like business as usual almost for these plants. The salt marsh mallows are blooming like crazy. There's even a lizard's tail that somehow survived all of this. So maybe they have a little more salinity tolerance than we first realized. This is where the storm surge hit at CERF. So my garden is over here, and it pushed up very, very far into our property. This is probably 200 yards from where the edge of the water line is. Okay. Yeah, I think everyone was just looking really rough around this point because it had been really, really dry. In hindsight, a few things I wish I would have planted a little bit lower, but this is how we learn. I finally got one muck sunflower bloom, and I got to enjoy chasing this long-tailed skipper around the garden and watching it eat. We also added 6 switchgrass plugs at this point, but they are not pictured. And then we added a second centralized garden. Why? Largely in part because I didn't want to bring visitors to CERF around that many mosquitoes. We have a lot of young kids there. I don't want to upset their parents by sending them home covered in mosquito bites. So UNO Garden Club members and the Society for Earth and Environmental Science students helped to set this up with us. And we also added some signs from the Urban Conservancy in New Orleans to add an educational component. So it is hard to see from here, but there's QR codes on each of these signs. And what it will connect you to is some information from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center and the Greater New Orleans Native Plant Initiative information and some other community resources to connect us all in our goal here. I am happy to report that all of my plants made it through the freeze. These are all post-freeze pictures, so that's why they look a little bit underwhelming, but I promise you everyone is here and everyone is happy. And then the last step in this process for me was to make sure that we added the garden to Homegrown National Park. So, oh, thank you. I got to meet Doug Tallamy this summer and took a selfie with him at the Wildlife Habitat Council conference. And I was like, I'm gonna add my garden and you're gonna see it. So if you see this, Doug, here it is. If you haven't added your garden yet or your gardens, I highly encourage you to do so. We have an awesome opportunity to track our impact through citizen science, so take advantage of it. So this is when we added our garden to the list. By the time I had added it, so that first image was taken in August. This next one was taken in early February, and we had 5 new acres added, 18 separate plantings, and 11 new users. But I'm curious how many of y'all are here. And when I checked the site on Monday, there was 8 new acres recorded and only 7 new users. So I'm kind of hopeful that one of you are here and want to tell me about your planting adventures. So I think that's it. And these are my sources. And thank you very much. Thank you very much.